You know that sinking feeling when you realize you're not just an outsider in someone's family. You're invisible? That was Hannah Blake's reality. For 4 years, she had been with Ethan Rivers. She wasn't just dating him. They lived together. Split rent, groceries, utilities. Every month, half her paycheck went into their shared life. But when it came to Ethan's family, she was always a guest. Tolerated accessory. It wasn't always this way. In the beginning, Ethan was charming. Kind. The guy who'd bring her coffee to the office because, "I missed you." He talked about a future, their future. Marriage, a house, maybe kids one day. But slowly, subtly, the cracks appeared. The first was Chelsea, Ethan's older sister. Divorced. Bitter. The kind of person who could suck the joy out of a sunny day just by walking into a room. At family dinners, she'd throw little jabs. "Oh, you work in marketing. How fun. My friend's daughter tried that for a while before she got a real job." Harmless, right? Until it wasn't. One evening, after too many glasses of wine, Chelsea cornered Hannah in the kitchen. "You know, you're not really family. Blood is blood. You're just here." That stung. But Hannah, ever the peacekeeper, smiled and brushed it off. Ethan, when told about it later, shrugged. "That's just Chelsea. She doesn't mean it." Margaret Rivers, Ethan's mother, wasn't much better. Passive-aggressive remarks were her specialty. "Thank you for bringing that casserole, dear. It's nice to see you contribute something." And yet, through it all, Hannah kept showing up. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You endure their baggage, their complicated family dynamics. You hope they'll see how much you're giving. But the hardest part, Ethan never once defended her. Not when Chelsea mocked her job. Not when Margaret belittled her efforts. Not even when Daniel, Ethan's own brother who used to be Hannah's friend, quietly distanced himself to keep the peace. It was like she was fighting for a place at a table that had no empty chairs. The final blow came one evening when Chelsea was ranting about her divorce. Again. And Hannah gently suggested maybe a part-time job could help take her mind off things. Chelsea's reaction was nuclear. "How dare you? You think you can tell me what to do with my life? You're not even family." That line. That ugly, sharp, unforgiving line. It cut deeper than any insult. Because it wasn't just Chelsea saying it. It was Ethan, sitting there in silence, letting it hang in the air. Margaret, of course, added her signature flourish. "No matter who or what happens, my son knows his priorities." Hannah felt her heart sink. Right then, right there, she realized she wasn't one of them. Not really. Not in their eyes. And worse, not in Ethan's. The car ride home was quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. In their actions. In their silences. Ethan didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he talked about his gym session the next morning. As if nothing had happened. And Hannah. She stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, wondering when exactly she had become so invisible. In that moment she knew. This wasn't her family. And maybe it never would be. You ever notice how the people who do the least are always the loudest about what you should do more of? That's exactly how it was for Hannah. After that humiliating family dinner, things didn't get better. They got quieter. But not the good kind of quiet. This was the heavy, suffocating silence of things left unsaid. The kind that fills every corner of a shared apartment until you can't breathe without feeling like you're intruding. Ethan didn't bring it up. Neither did she. But his actions spoke louder than his words. He stayed out later. Started drinking more. Came home with that smug, glazed look, the one that said, "I've had a bad day, and now you get to deal with me." When Hannah voiced her concerns, it was the same script. "You're overreacting. Why are you always so dramatic? Can't I have a little space?" Funny how men always ask for space from the very women holding everything together. Hannah wasn't nagging. She wasn't yelling. She was tired. Tired of watching him spiral. Tired of being called controlling for wanting basic respect. The worst was when he accused her of lying. One night, after a tense argument about his drinking, her heart started racing. It wasn't metaphorical. It was real. Palpitations. Tight chest. A familiar flutter of arrhythmia that flared up whenever her anxiety spiked. She sat on the couch, hand over her chest, trying to breathe through it. Ethan looked at her like she was performing. "Cut it out. You're being dramatic. You're not even crying. That's insane, right? Imagine watching someone you claim to love, struggling to catch their breath, and deciding it's an act because they're not sobbing for your attention. That moment, that was the crack. The fracture that turned into a canyon. For months, Hannah had been emotionally distancing herself, sleeping in the guest room, avoiding intimacy, minimizing interactions. But after that night, it wasn't just emotional. It was mental. She switched off. Stopped asking how his day was. Stopped waiting for him to ask about hers. Stopped hoping for any version of the man she had fallen in love with. The apartment they shared became a cold museum of used to be. Pictures still hung on the walls. His gym shoes still by the door. But the home, that was gone. And in the quiet of that guest room, Hannah started making a plan. She didn't rage pack her things. She didn't cry herself to sleep. She just planned. Checked listings for apartments. Calculated her half of the rent, bills, groceries. Every dollar she had poured into this shared life where she was always too much, yet never enough. And quietly, she started pulling herself back, piece by piece. The funny thing is, Ethan didn't even notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. Because acknowledging her absence would mean admitting his own failure. And Jason Rivers didn't do failure. Instead, he doubled down. More drinking. More cold shoulders. More nights out with friends who validated his victim narrative. "She's so uptight. She's suffocating you, man. You deserve someone who lets you breathe." Hannah let him breathe. All the way into emotional suffocation. And as she sat on that guest bed, laptop open, scrolling through apartment listings, she felt lighter than she had in months. Because for the first time, she wasn't waiting for Ethan to choose her. She was choosing herself. No fights. No ultimatums. No, "we need to talk." Just quiet detachment. That's how people leave long before they walk out the door. And Ethan. He was too busy blaming her to see it happening. You know what's scarier than someone slamming doors during a fight? Someone going silent while they pack. That's the level Hannah Blake had reached. It wasn't some impulsive breakup moment. No dramatic suitcase by the door. No screaming match about "how dare you." It was calculated, cold, but not in a cruel way. In a survival way. Hannah had learned the hard way that yelling at Ethan was pointless. He didn't listen. He didn't change. He waited for her to tire herself out, then went back to whatever made him comfortable. So this time she wasn't going to yell. She was going to leave. Quietly. Started small. The important documents, birth certificate, banking info, her own lease papers, tucked into a folder and slid into her work tote. Her favorite books, slowly disappearing from the shared shelves, reappearing in a box at Lena's place. Clothes taken for the gym, never returned. Ethan didn't notice. Why would he? He was too busy curating his life as the misunderstood boyfriend who gave and gave, until he couldn't anymore. If only his friends knew what she gave. The shared rent, of course, split right down the middle. But also the groceries she picked up when he forgot. The laundry she folded. The emotional labor of reminding him about his mom's birthday, scheduling dentist appointments, dealing with the landlord. But those things never made the highlight reel. Hannah didn't expect gratitude anymore. She didn't even want it. What she wanted was peace. And that meant leaving without asking for permission. One afternoon, while Ethan was at his usual gym and beers session, Hannah met Lena at a small cafe. "Are you sure you're ready?" Lena asked. Hannah sipped her coffee, savoring the warmth. "I'm beyond ready." Lena grinned. "Good. Because this has been a long time coming. You've been breaking up with him for months. This is just logistics." Hannah smiled. It was strange how light she felt. This wasn't a heartbreak. It was a homecoming. To herself. The new apartment was small. 1 bedroom. Tiny kitchen. But it had sunlight. A ridiculous amount of sunlight pouring through the windows every morning. Hannah hadn't realized how dark Ethan's place had felt until she saw this one. The decision was easy. She signed the lease that same day. No discussions with Ethan. No "what do you think?" conversation. Because his opinion didn't get to dictate her peace anymore. The following week was a blur of quiet movements. Packing the rest of her things while Ethan was at work. Canceling her portion of shared subscriptions. Transferring her mailing address. Each step was a silent rebellion against the years she had spent seeking approval from people who never gave it. When Ethan noticed the missing dishes, the gap in the bookshelf, the lack of her presence, it was already done. The final piece was moving day. Hannah chose a morning she knew Ethan would be out. Coffee with friends. Same routine. Lena showed up with her car, helping load the last few boxes. No tears. No long-winded speeches. Just the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. As they closed the trunk, Lena looked at her. "You ready to disappear?" Hannah didn't hesitate. "I'm ready to reappear. Just not here." That line felt good. Felt final. Before leaving, she left a note on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic. Just simple. "I'm done. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. Take care, Ethan." No accusations. No begging. Just the truth. She locked the door behind her and walked away. No turning back. Ethan would come home to an empty space. But really, that space had been empty for months. He just hadn't noticed. And that was never going to be Hannah's problem again. You know what hurts the most for people like Ethan? Not being left. Being ignored. Hannah knew that. When Ethan came home to an apartment half empty, his first reaction wasn't heartbreak. It was disbelief. Disbelief that she had actually done it. That she had left without a final fight, without begging for closure, without giving him a stage to play the victim. He stared at the note on the counter like it was written in a foreign language. "I'm done. Not out of anger. Out of necessity." Simple. Brutal. And so unlike the woman he thought he had wrapped around his finger. For the next few hours, his ego went into overdrive. First he called. Hannah saw the screen light up. "Ethan Rivers." She didn't answer. Then came the text. "Where are you? We need to talk. Stop being childish." Childish. That word almost made her laugh. As if quietly reclaiming your life after years of emotional neglect was childish. Ethan escalated, of course. "You're overreacting. We could have worked this out. I knew you'd pull something like this. You're so selfish." The projection was textbook. But Hannah didn't bite. Not because she didn't have words, but because she had said everything she needed to, with her actions. Each ignored call, each unread message was louder than any argument they'd ever had. Ethan wasn't used to silence. He was used to baiting her into long, exhausting fights where he could twist her words until she apologized just to make it stop. But now he was screaming into a void. Daniel, his brother, tried reaching out. "I heard you moved out. What happened?" Hannah didn't respond. Because Daniel had watched it all happen in real time. Watched his family disrespect her. Watched Ethan let them. And said nothing. Silence is complicity. Margaret even called. Left a voicemail dripping with fake concern. "I hope you're okay, dear. Family isn't perfect, but we all make mistakes. Come by for dinner, we can talk things through." Dinner. As if one more suffocating evening at the Rivers table would fix years of being treated like furniture. Hannah deleted the voicemail. No anger. No bitterness. Just clarity. The new apartment felt different. Not because it was better, but because it was hers. Every item, every space, every moment. Hers. No passive-aggressive remarks. No walking on eggshells. No invisible emotional labor. She bought herself a cheap bottle of wine, sat on the floor with Lena, and celebrated the quiet. You know he's going to play the victim, right? Lena said. Hannah nodded. He can play whatever role he wants. I'm not in the audience anymore. That line hit home. Because that's what it had always been. Performance. Ethan, the misunderstood man. Hannah, the unreasonable woman. Margaret, the martyr mother. Chelsea, the perpetual victim. But no more. Hannah had left the theater. And now, their drama could go on without her. For days the calls kept coming. Ethan cycled through every tactic. Anger, guilt, sadness. You're really going to throw away 4 years over one argument. You're not even giving me a chance to fix this. I miss you. But missing someone isn't the same as valuing them. And Ethan had never valued her. Not really. Not when he let his family belittle her. Not when he ignored her health scares. Not when he dismissed her boundaries. So why should she value his regrets? Hannah muted his contact. Not blocked. Muted. Because silence is a choice. And she wanted him to sit with that. Day by day, his presence in her life faded. Not because he gave up. But because she had made herself unreachable. Emotionally. Mentally. Physically. And that, more than any argument, was the closure she needed. Ethan would tell people she left suddenly. That she blindsided him. That he was willing to make it work. But the truth was that she had been leaving for months. She had just finally walked out the door. Do you know what's underrated? Is not the fake kind where you stay quiet to avoid conflict. I mean real peace. The kind that comes from finally realizing you don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing yourself. That's where Hannah Blake found herself. For the first time in years, she wasn't rehearsing comebacks in her head. She wasn't bracing for the next snide remark from Chelsea. She wasn't dreading another cold car ride with Ethan. She was simply existing. And it was glorious. Her new apartment wasn't perfect. The fridge made a weird humming noise. The bathroom tiles needed work. But every inch of it felt like freedom. On a lazy Sunday morning, sunlight poured through her windows. She made herself coffee, her way with way too much creamer, and no one there to mock her for it. She sat on her tiny balcony, feet propped up, listening to the city breathe. And she realized something. She didn't miss Ethan. Not the real Ethan. Maybe she missed the version she thought he was. The man who used to bring her coffee. The man who talked about futures. But that man had disappeared a long time ago. What remained was a shell of convenience. Partner in title only. And she had spent too long justifying her place in his life. She used to think that if she did enough, paid her share, stayed quiet at family dinners, endured the jabs with grace, she would eventually belong. But now, sitting in her own space, she saw it clearly. Belonging isn't something you should have to earn through suffering. It's something you're welcomed into. And the Rivers family had never welcomed her. Not really. Lena popped by later that afternoon. With takeout and that signature grin. You look lighter, Lena said, plopping onto the couch. I feel lighter, Hannah admitted. They didn't talk about Ethan much. Because there wasn't much left to say. Hannah didn't need to dissect his latest passive-aggressive text. She didn't need to justify why she left. She just needed to live. And every small choice, from the playlist she put on to the throw pillows she picked, was a reminder that this life was hers. Not a compromise. Not a constant negotiation. Just hers. Ethan's name still popped up occasionally. Missed call here. Pointless message there. But Hannah didn't feel the pull anymore. She didn't feel the need to explain. Not to him. Not to his family. Not even to the people who would inevitably ask, what happened? Because sometimes nothing happens in one big moment. Sometimes, it's the slow accumulation of being disregarded, of being unseen, of realizing that loving someone doesn't require you to accept being treated as optional. That quiet knowing. That was worth more than any grand breakup speech. She didn't need closure. She had given herself that the moment she chose to walk away without a fight. In the coming weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Work, Friends, solo coffee dates, lazy afternoons with a book. Simple things. But they felt like acts of reclamation. Little by little, she was taking herself back. One morning, as she scrolled through her phone, she saw a notification. Ethan had updated his status. Some vague, self-pitying quote about loyalty and being betrayed by those closest to you. Hannah smiled. Not out of spite, but out of pure, detached amusement. Because she knew the truth. And the truth didn't need defending. She put her phone down, finished her coffee, and stepped out into the sunlight. Free. Finally. You know what people like Ethan hate the most? Not being hated back. Because anger is still attention. But indifference. That cuts deeper than any insult. Hannah didn't need revenge. She didn't need to show him or prove her worth. Her leaving was the statement. Living well was the echo. Weeks passed. Ethan's texts slowed from daily to occasional, then stopped altogether. Not because he had found closure, but because there was nothing left to push against. Hannah had become unreachable, not by blocking him, but by being untouchable emotionally. She didn't stalk his socials. She didn't craft cryptic posts. She didn't care. And that was worse for him than any public fallout. Meanwhile, Hannah's life blossomed quietly. Her new apartment wasn't flashy, but it was hers. She started redecorating. Slowly. Intentionally. No more arguing over modern minimalism. That really just meant sterile and cold. She picked cozy textures, warm lights, plants that made the space feel alive. It was more than decor. It was a reclaiming of space, her space. She reconnected with friends who had drifted away, not because of drama, but because of how emotionally drained she'd been. Lena, as always, was her rock. You notice how much energy you wasted trying to be liked by people who never intended to like you, Lena said one evening. Hannah nodded. That was the painful truth. The Rivers never hated her. They just didn't see her. Not as an equal. Not as family. She had spent years shrinking herself to fit into a space they never made room for. But no more. Every quiet morning in her apartment was a middle finger to that dynamic. Not out of bitterness. Out of freedom. One day, by pure coincidence, she ran into Daniel Rivers. At a grocery store of all places. He looked awkward. Guilty. Hey, Hannah. Long time. She smiled politely. Yeah. Long time. He tried small talk. But the weight of everything unsaid hung between them. Finally he said it. I should have said something. Back then. Hannah didn't absolve him. But she didn't lash out either. You made your choice, Daniel. So did I. He nodded. There was nothing more to say. And that was enough. Hannah walked away feeling lighter. Because closure doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it comes from seeing that you've outgrown the people who once made you feel small. The world didn't fall apart because she left Ethan. It opened up. In ways she hadn't imagined. More job opportunities. More time for herself. More clarity. Her life expanded precisely because she had finally let go of the dead weight holding it down. And as for Ethan, he became a story. Chapter. Not a scar. Just a reminder of who she would never be again. Hannah didn't need a revenge arc. She didn't need a dramatic showdown. She had something far better. A life where she no longer asked for permission to be respected. And that, in the end, was the loudest revenge of all. There's a moment that hits you after you walk away from something toxic. It's not loud. It's not even sudden. It's this slow, quiet realization. You don't miss the chaos. That was Hannah Blake's victory. No confetti. No standing ovation. Just peace. Pure, unbothered, quiet peace. Her life didn't transform overnight. She still had bills to pay. Still had bad days at work. Still had lonely evenings where the silence echoed louder than expected. But you know what made it different? It was her silence. Not the suffocating kind that came from being ignored. Not the tense, eggshell silence of a toxic relationship. This silence was chosen. And that changes everything. Ethan's shadow faded fast. The first week felt strange. The second week felt lighter. By the third, he was barely a passing thought. Because when you stop giving energy to someone who never deserved it, they shrink in your mind. One afternoon, Hannah found herself at the park. The same park where she used to sit, debating if she should leave. Funny how the place hadn't changed, but she had. She watched families walk by. People laughing. Living. And for once, she wasn't longing for that. She was living it. In her own way. Simple. Uncomplicated. Real. Lena texted. You survived. You didn't even burn down his apartment. Proud of you. Hannah laughed. Because the old version of her would have imagined elaborate revenge plots. But the woman sitting on that park bench. She didn't need revenge. She had reality. And that was sweeter. Ethan might still be spinning his version of events. Margaret might still host dinners where Hannah's name came up in hushed, disapproving tones. But none of that reached her anymore. Because she wasn't in that story. She had written her own. A story where choosing yourself isn't a betrayal. It's a necessity. A story where silence isn't punishment. It's protection. The world hadn't changed. But Hannah had. And that was enough. She didn't need to explain why she left. Not to Ethan. Not to his family. Not even to herself. 'Cause the weight was gone. The constant proving. The exhausting justifying. In its place was something simple. Freedom. And it didn't come with fanfare. Came with a deep breath. A quiet smile. And the undeniable fact that choosing yourself is always enough. Final moral message. Walking away isn't weakness. It's not cold. It's not cruel. It's choosing peace over being tolerated. You don't owe anyone your energy just because you gave